She dropped her sample collection kit and looked up to see a streak of fire tearing across the purple sky. Not a meteor, but something far more concerning. The object was too large, too controlled in its descent. A ship Elena sprinted toward. Her research station, her boots crunching through the glass-like vegetation that dominated this world. After 3 years of solitude on this remote planet, studying its unique silicon-based ecosystem, she had grown accustomed to the profound. Silence. The crash shattered that peace like a hammer through crystal. The impact site was a smoking crater 2 kilometers from her station. Elena approached cautiously, her environmental suit's sensors detecting no immediate radiation or toxic gases. What she found defied her expectations. Not the twisted wreckage of a human vessel, but something altogether different. The ship's hull was organic, composed of what appeared to be living wood and metallic fibers woven together like a basket. Biotechnology she'd never seen before. As she climbed over the debris, Elena heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of children crying. Not human children, the vocalizations were too musical, too harmonious, but unmistakably the sounds of young beings in distress. She followed the sounds to an intact section of the ship that had broken away during impact. Inside, what appeared to be a nursery pod, Elena discovered 12 small beings huddled together. They were unlike anything in the xenobiology textbooks, humanoid in basic structure, but clearly plant-derived. Their skin had the waxy sheen of leaves, their hair resembled delicate ferns, and their eyes were large and green with pupils that shifted like opening flower buds. They couldn't have been more than the equivalent of human children, ranging from perhaps 5 to 12 years old. The moment Elena's helmet light illuminated them, they screamed in terror. The eldest, a girl with bark-like skin and amber eyes, threw herself protectively in front of the others. Through her suit's translation software, Elena caught fragments of their panicked words. Flesh devourer, deathbringer. The stories were true. Elena raised her hands peacefully, trying to project calm through her body language. I'm not going to hurt you, she said softly, though she wasn't sure if they could understand her yet. The translation protocol was still analyzing their language patterns. The children pressed themselves against the far wall of their pod, whimpering. Elena noticed their emergency food supplies scattered on the floor, strange crystalline structures that had been reduced to powder during the crash. They were starving, and judging by the way they recoiled from her presence, they believed she was some kind of monster. Elena's mind raced. She was a xenobotanist, not a xenobiologist, but she could see these children were in immediate danger. Their ship was destroyed, their food was gone, and they were trapped on a world whose native plant life might be completely incompatible with their biology. She was their only hope for survival, but first she had to overcome their terror of her very existence. As the translation software finally achieved a breakthrough, Elena heard the eldest child speak clearly for the first time. Please, flesh-eater, do not consume us. We are only seedlings. We have barely begun to grow. The weight of their situation settled on Elena's shoulders. These children didn't just fear her. They feared the very essence of what she was. Somehow, she had to become their savior while they believed she was their destroyer. Asterisk. Elena spent the next 3 days trying to gain the trust of the Verdani children, for that's what they called themselves, the Green Ones. She learned their names. Pollen, the youngest at barely 5 years old. Sage, the protective eldest who seemed to be their designated guardian. Moss, a quiet boy who observed everything with intelligent eyes. And 9 others, each named after some aspect of plant life. The children's terror wasn't just instinctive, it was cultural, bred into them through generations of stories about the flesh devourers. Through patient conversation with Sage, Elena learned that the Verdani were descendants of a plant-based species that had achieved sentience. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of photosynthetic harmony. They consumed only minerals, water, and sunlight, supplemented by carefully synthesized nutrients that never required taking life from another being to them. Elena represented the ultimate horror, a creature that sustained itself by consuming other living things. In their mythology, flesh-eaters were demons that brought ecological collapse wherever they went. The fact that she was trying to help them only made things more confusing and terrifying. "Your kind destroyed the green worlds," Sage told her one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "The stories say you came from the dark, between stars, and ate everything that grew. Plants, animals, even the soil itself, until nothing remained but ash." Elena's heart sank. She was beginning to understand that the Verdani had encountered humans before, and the meeting hadn't gone well. Possibly colonial expansion, resource extraction, or terraforming projects had devastated Verdani worlds. No wonder they feared her, but fear wasn't their only problem. The children were growing weaker each day. Elena had tried offering them samples of the local vegetation, but their digestive systems couldn't process the silicon-based plant life of Kepler-442b. They needed their specific nutrient synthesis technology, which had been destroyed in the crash. Without it, they would slowly starve to death. Elena worked frantically in her laboratory, trying to find a solution. She analyzed the remnants of their food supplies, reverse-engineered their nutritional requirements, and attempted to synthesize something they could digest. But her equipment wasn't designed for this kind of biological compatibility problem. On the fourth day, Pollen, the youngest, collapsed. Her photosynthetic patches had turned brown, and she was barely conscious. Elena knew she had to act fast, but everything she tried failed. The child was dying, and the others were losing hope. That night, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She had one option left, but it was dangerous and would require her to use her own body as a living laboratory. She would have to become exactly what the children feared most, a consumer of life, in order to save them. She began by consuming small amounts of the local plant life, then monitoring her body's response. The silicon-based organisms were toxic to human digestion, but Elena's medical training allowed her to track the biochemical processes. She used her equipment to extract and analyze the nutrients her body processed, looking for compounds that might be compatible with Verdani biology. The process was exhausting and made her violently ill, but after 12 hours of experimentation, she had something, a nutrient paste that might work. It contained minerals and organic compounds that her body had broken down and reformed into a state that might be digestible to the children. She approached Pollen first, the weakest of the group. Sage tried to block her, but Elena's desperation was evident. "Please," she said, holding out the paste. "I know what you think of me, but this might save her." Sage's eyes widened as she realized what Elena was offering. You processed this through your own body? You consumed life and transformed it?" Elena nodded. "I had to. It's the only way." The moment was a turning point. Sage saw that Elena hadn't consumed life for pleasure or power. She had taken it into herself and transformed it into something that could sustain them. The flesh-eater was sacrificing herself to keep them alive. The nutrient paste worked. Pollen's condition stabilized within hours, and her photosynthetic patches began to show hints of their original green. But Elena's solution came at a tremendous cost to herself. The process of consuming and refining the toxic local vegetation was slowly poisoning her, and she was growing weaker with each batch she prepared. Word of Elena's sacrifice spread among the children. They began to watch her with a mixture of awe and growing understanding. Moss, the observant boy, was the first to grasp the full implications of what she was doing. "She's not consuming life," he told the others one evening as they watched Elena work in her laboratory. She's transforming it, like a garden that eats compost and makes flowers. This concept was revolutionary for the Verdani. They had always seen consumption as destruction, but Elena was showing them that it could be transformation. She was becoming a living bridge between two incompatible forms of life. Asterisk, as days passed, Elena established a routine. Each morning, she would forage for the least toxic local plants, consume them despite the nausea and pain, and then spend hours in her lab extracting and refining the nutrients. The children began to help, bringing her water and monitoring her. Vital signs when the poisoning became too severe. Sage, once the most fearful, became Elena's closest assistant. She had a natural talent for understanding biological processes, and she helped Elena optimize the nutrient extraction procedures. "You're like a tree," Sage observed one day, watching Elena work. "You take in raw materials and transform them into something that can feed others." Elena smiled weakly. "I never thought of it that way." "In our culture, trees are sacred," Sage continued. "They're the ultimate givers of life. We revere them because they ask for nothing but give everything." The other children began to see Elena differently too. Pollen, now recovered enough to move around, started following Elena everywhere, chattering about her day and asking endless questions about Elena's world. The older children helped with the food preparation, turning it into a communal activity that brought them together. Elena's health was declining rapidly. The constant exposure to the toxic vegetation was taking its toll. She had lost significant weight, her hair was falling out, and she frequently suffered from severe stomach pains. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had come to this planet to study its unique ecosystem, was slowly dying to keep 12 alien children alive. Children noticed her deterioration and began to worry. They had lost their original fear of her, but now they faced a new terror, losing their protector. Sage organized the older children to take on more responsibilities, but they all knew that without Elena's unique ability to process the local vegetation, they would eventually starve. One night, as Elena lay recovering from a particularly severe bout of poisoning, young Pollen approached her bedside. "Elena," she whispered, "why are you doing this? Why are you hurting yourself for us?" Elena looked at the child's concerned face, so innocent and trusting. "Because," she said softly, "that's what living things do for each other. We take care of each other, even when it's hard." Pollen was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is that why you eat other living things? To take care of them?" Elena had never thought of it that way, but she nodded. Maybe that's what consumption really is, taking life into yourself and making it part of something bigger. The conversation marked another shift in how the children viewed Elena. They began to see her not as a monster who devoured life, but as a creature who incorporated life into herself to create something new. She was teaching them a completely different way of understanding the relationship between living things, but Elena knew she couldn't continue this way much longer. She needed to find a more sustainable solution, or she would die trying to save them. The question was whether she could find that solution before her body gave out completely. Elena's condition continued to deteriorate, but her relationship with the children deepened. They had moved beyond fear to something resembling family. The children took turns caring for her during her worst moments, and she taught them about human biology, Earth's ecosystems, and the complex relationships between different forms of life. Moss proved to be particularly gifted at understanding biological systems. He spent hours observing Elena's nutrient processing procedures and began to suggest improvements. "What if we filtered the toxins before you consume them?" he asked. "One day, your body wouldn't have to work so hard to process them." Together, they developed a primitive filtration system using Elena's equipment and some materials salvaged from the crashed ship. It reduced the toxicity of the local vegetation significantly, though Elena still had to consume and process it, to make it compatible with Verdani biology. The breakthrough came when Sage made a startling observation. "Elena," she said one morning, "your gut bacteria ... they're changing." Elena ran tests and discovered that Sage was right. The constant exposure to alien vegetation had caused her digestive microbiome to adapt. New strains of bacteria were emerging that could break down the silicon-based compounds more efficiently. Her body was literally evolving to better serve her adopted children. "It's like you're becoming a garden," Pollen said with wonder. "A living garden that grows food for us." The children began to contribute in ways Elena hadn't expected. They had an intuitive understanding of plant biology that helped her identify which local species were most nutritious and least toxic. Their knowledge of Verdani physiology helped her fine-tune the nutrient profiles. They were becoming a true team, working together to solve an impossible problem. But Elena wasn't the only one changing. The children were learning to see consumption and transformation as natural parts of life. When they found a dead animal, a small creature that had died naturally, they didn't recoil in horror as they once would have. Instead, they observed with curiosity as Elena explained how its decomposition would feed the soil and help plants grow. "On our world," Sage admitted, "we were taught that death was the end. But here, with you, we're learning that death can be the beginning of something new." Elena nodded weakly. "That's the cycle of life. Everything is connected. When something dies, it becomes part of something else. Nothing is ever truly lost." The children began to apply this understanding to their own situation. They realized that their crashed ship, their destroyed food supplies, even their initial terror, all of these things had been transformed into something new. They had become a family, learned about different ways of living, and discovered that the universe was far more complex and beautiful than they had been taught. But Elena's health was reaching a critical point. She was barely able to stand, and the nutrient production was taking longer each day. The children knew that if something didn't change soon, they would lose their protector and face starvation. That's when Moss made a discovery that would change everything. While exploring the crash site, he found something they had missed, a small, intact section of the ship's biocomputer. It contained partial genetic templates for Verdani nutrient synthesis organisms' microscopic life forms that had been used aboard their ship to process food. "Elena," he said excitedly, "if we could grow these organisms in your laboratory, maybe they could help with the nutrient processing. Maybe you wouldn't have to do it all yourself." Elena examined the genetic templates with growing hope. The organisms were designed to work symbiotically with Verdani biology, but with some modifications, they might be able to process the local vegetation directly. It would require careful genetic engineering, but it was possible. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt genuine hope. She wouldn't have to sacrifice her health to keep the children alive. They could create a sustainable system that would work until rescue arrived. But first, she had to survive long enough to make it work. Elena's genetic engineering project became a race against time. Her body was failing rapidly, but she worked with desperate determination, supported by the children who had become her family. Sage proved to have an unexpected talent for molecular biology, helping Elena modify the genetic templates they'd recovered from the crashed ship. The process was complex and dangerous. They had to cultivate the Verdani nutrient synthesis organisms in Elena's makeshift laboratory, then teach them to process the local vegetation. It required precise temperature control, specific nutrient broths, and careful monitoring of genetic expression, all while Elena battled the effects of chronic poisoning. Young Pollen appointed herself Elena's primary caretaker, bringing her water and monitoring her vital signs with the dedication of a trained nurse. "You can't die," she told Elena firmly one evening. You're our grower mother. We need you." The term grower mother had emerged naturally among the children. It represented their new understanding of Elena's role, not as a destroyer who consumed life, but as a nurturer who transformed it into something that could sustain others. She was, in their eyes, the ultimate gardener. The breakthrough came on Elena's weakest day. She had collapsed while trying to process a batch of nutrients and was barely conscious when Mas ran into the laboratory, shouting with excitement, "Elena, the organisms, they're working. They're processing the local plants." Elena forced herself to sit up and examine Mas's readings. The modified organisms were indeed breaking down the silicon-based vegetation and transforming it into compounds that the Verdani children could digest. The process was still inefficient, but it was working. Over the next few days, Elena and the children worked together to optimize the organism cultures. They built a small bioreactor from salvaged ship components and laboratory equipment, creating a system that could produce enough nutrients to sustain all 12 children. Elena's body began to recover as she no longer had to consume toxic vegetation daily. The children watched in amazement as their grower mother slowly regained her strength. They had learned to see her not as a monster, but as a miracle, a being whose alien biology had become the key to their survival. "You know," Sage said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, "when we first saw you, we thought you were the most dangerous thing in the universe. Now we know you're the most precious." Elena smiled, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. "I learned as much from you as you learned from me. You taught me that consumption doesn't have to be destruction. It can be transformation, care, love." The children had indeed transformed Elena's understanding of her own nature. She had always seen her omnivorous biology as simply practical, but they had shown her that it was actually a form of alchemy, the ability to take disparate forms of life and transform them into something new and nurturing. 3 months after the crash, a rescue signal finally appeared on Elena's communications array. A Verdani search vessel had detected the crash site and was approaching Kepler 442b. Elena helped the children prepare for rescue, but she was surprised by their reaction. Asterisk.